CURES is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.
Helping you lead a healthier life. This is CURES.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CURES Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness for our mind, body, and spirit. I'm Kara Sundlin, and I'm so excited to share with you some groundbreaking science that shows spirituality can help every facet of our well-being. And joining us in studio now is New York Times best-selling author and clinical psychologist and scientist, Dr. Lisa Miller, also the founder and director of the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute. It is the first Ivy League graduate program and research institute in spirituality and psychology. I'm so fascinated. Thank you for being here.
Kara, it's wonderful to connect with you, and I'm so excited to share this science.
Yeah. So the book is called The Awakened Brain. And what I found so fascinating is in the world of academics or medicine or news, we don't really talk about spirituality. It's considered something people do in their private time, or it's something separate. You wanted to study how it shows up in our brain. What did you find?
So, Kara, you're right. There's been for a long time the notion that we don't talk about spirituality publicly because people had it confused with religion. But, you know, it turns out that for many people, religion and spirituality do go hand in hand, but they're actually two different things. Religion, whether I happen to be Catholic or Jewish or Hindu, whatever it may be, is a gift of our parents and grandparents. Religion is environmentally transmitted, prayers, texts. Spirituality is innate. Every single one of us, we know through genetic twin studies, is born with a natural capacity for spiritual life. And we can even trace that in the brain using MRI studies.
Well, that's how the book opens up. There's like this excitement of all, you know, what you would expect. Scientists at an Ivy League institution kind of not even wanting to do this study, but I think you encourage them. And then kind of this jaw-dropping moment of they see something on an MRI that basically, according to your research, shows we're wired for spirituality.
Kara, we published in JAMA Psychiatry, one of the very most top peer-reviewed journals, the neurocorrelates of spiritual awareness. And even more astounding is that the regions of our brain that get thick and strong like a tree, cortical thickness, in sustained spiritual life, day in and day out, are regions that are not thick, but thin when we fight with major recurrent depression, which means spirituality is neuroprotective against recurrent major depression, against despair.
Well, and let's talk about that. So basically, you have started researching and coining a new term, I think it's a new term, of spiritual health. I guess we've talked about it, but this is really a field of study you're passionate about. People can now get a master's degree at your institute. Yes. With Columbia, but
the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute.
Yes. So what is spiritual health?
So the science over now 2 decades is so strong, whether we're looking at MRI studies of the neurocorrelates in the brain of spirituality or genotyping studies, what genes go hand in hand with our natural spiritual awareness. The data is so strong that spiritual health has now straddled up side by side with mental health, physical health, and social health for the Surgeon General of the United States. Spiritual health is now the 4th pillar of holistic health.
I mean, we talk about holistic health on this show all the time, and there's still a feeling, it seems like, in the world of science, like some of this stuff can be a little woo-hoo, or there's not enough studies on this, or it's just we have to see it in the medical journals, or this is changing, at least from what you're seeing. There's a lot of science that's backing up the idea that we are wired to have a higher power of any sort, something to surrender to.
So, you know, it's so often when we're struggling with addiction in AA or NA, the real linchpin of recovery is learning to hand it over to our higher power. And as we do, as we surrender in AA or NA, suddenly life becomes more buoyant and we start to realize that we're loved and we're guided. We're not at this alone. Well, it turns out, Kara, that we are built, every single one of us, to learn to hand it over on day one. In fact, we don't have to learn it at all. We are born and hardwired to naturally hand it over, to be in a relationship with our higher power. That is our birthright. That is our neuro birthright.
It's just part of the human brain.
It is part of the human brain. Now, unfortunately, it gets stamped out.
Okay.
In a lot of cases. We've really put an ice age, a cold ice storm over spiritual life. As you said, it's worst of all in the center of the medical profession and in science. But finally now we have 2 decades of really good peer-reviewed science, meaning, published in American Journal of Psychiatry, JAMA, real top journals that say it's true, it is a fact. Science says it's a fact. We are all naturally spiritual beings, and when we strengthen our awakened brain, we are less depressed. We are less addicted.
And that's really the groundbreaking of how can we turn this into something that changes lives. Spiritual health, the ability to turn something over, to connect with that part of yourself, whatever you want to call it, is neuroprotective against depression and anxiety. You have some big statistics.
And even suicide.
Okay.
So the greatest killer right now of high school students is actually not cancer or COVID. It is suicide, right alongside auto accidents. If you told me 30 years ago that what would take high school students' life would be their own hand, it would seem unfathomable. We have the antidote. We have it right here. When spiritual life is shared in fellowship, shared in any form of coming together, the Sangha, the Minyan, a family, a group of youth, a community program. When spiritual life is shared, we are 82% protected against completed suicide. If I said there were a pill that could protect every young person in America against suicide, we'd say hand it over. Well, we have it. This is our birthright. A strong spiritual life shared with one another is the greatest source of resilience known in clinical or medical science against suicide.
And what you want to make clear is spiritual health, spiritual life has nothing to do with religion. You may not subscribe to any religion. So what does it look like to have spiritual health,
Right.
even if you don't subscribe to religion?
Right. And for some people, spiritual life is held within their religion, about 60% of people in our country. And for some people, spiritual life is held in family and nature, in some forms of art or music. But whether or not it is within a faith tradition, Hindu, Catholic, Christian, Jewish, or outside a faith tradition, we are built to know that we are loved and held, to perceive and feel that we are guided, and we are never alone. Loved and held, guided, and never alone. Now, I should say by God or by Jesus or by my higher power, whatever word I give that.
By the universe.
By the universe, by the force of all life.
So as you start, for the average person watching at home, what are some tips that would actually help them strengthen these protective factors of spiritual life? How do we get better spiritual health?
Right. So, Carrie, you raised an important point because part one of spiritual health is our connection to our higher power. But part two equally is that we then, as we are loved, held, and guided, turn to one another to be loving, holding, guiding, and never leave anyone alone. Relational spirituality towards one another opens up our connection to our higher power, and vice versa. As we grow closer to our higher power, we're more loving to one another. What you do to the least of these, you do to me. So if we're stuck, I mean depressed and isolated and feeling horrible, then walk out the door, go to your neighbor and say, I see that there's snow all over your driveway. Can I dig you out? Go down the street and say, listen, I saw you needed some time with your husband. Could I babysit your kids? When we act in a way that's loving, we suddenly realize that the world is full of love. When we show up for others, we suddenly realize we're not alone.
Is it, how do we do that when you're feeling depressed and anxious? Probably the last thing you want to go is do something for others. You want someone else to help you.
Yes.
So how do we, I guess, make that help people so they're perhaps not feeling so bad, but they might be feeling like I can't get out of bed?
Love of neighbor is the cure to depression. We looked at people who are at very high risk for depression, who suffered, their mom suffered, sometimes their grandma suffered, right through the line.
Yeah.
And when they developed in their heart a deep love of neighbor, it's very apropos on the eve of the election, right? I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, I don't care where you're going to vote. I love you, civic love. I love you, you're my neighbor, you're my fellow parent, you're my favorite fellow co-worker. I love you. That is spiritual. That is radical, unconditional love, and that is spiritual.
And meaning that you don't have to agree with the people to love them.
Oh, not at all. You don't need to have the same idea. You don't need to have the same way of life. You certainly don't need to look the same. You need to choose to love in your heart civic love.
I mean, it reminds me, for those who watch Channel 3 on a regular basis, we have, The Price is Right. And Drew Carey, at the end of every episode, will say, don't forget I love you. I really love you. And some people are like, how can you don't even know me. How can you love me? So how do you explain that it's a little bit different what you're talking about, or why that matters? It's not just something a Hollywood actor says, but that it's actually real.
True spiritual love is a choice.
Okay.
I love you whether or not you love me back. I love you even if you dislike or hate me. It's a choice. Kara, I had the great joy and honor of meeting His Holiness the Dalai Lama a couple months ago. And what the Dalai Lama said, so I'm grateful to share it forward, is that love is a discipline. Love is a practice. And we can choose to love even if we're being despised, because love is what is transformative. And it's not just a nice thing. It's actually the only way to a sustainable world. Is tit for tat is a real downward spiral, and it's not much of a way to live.
Right. I mean, and biblically, you hear an eye for an eye leaves everyone blind, or things like that. So different than maybe, I'm thinking of young people, because you're right, teens are struggling. We have a huge mental health crisis among adults, but also among teens. We've had some sad suicides in our community of kids that you would think were not alone, that they were athletes, they had friends.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So this is, when you say it's neuroprotective, how do we put that in the practical? If you're a mom listening and saying, okay, good, I want my child to have better spiritual health, I want to get them out of this anxiety and depression, how do we do that?
There's 3 things every parent has available to them, and this is not one more thing to do. It is already built into us.
Okay.
I say as a parent, having raised 3 kids. Okay. The first is that we are, as parents, the spiritual ambassadors. When we walk the walk of spiritual life, we're going to stop and we're going to pull over because that family needs help. We're going to go to the homeless shelter. We're going to be forgiving even though that girl at high school was mean to you. We're going to choose a spiritual walk. Our children are riveted and equally narrating what we're doing at a spiritual level. Talk the walk. Why? Because that family down the road, they're God's children every bit as much as we are. Why? Because that homeless man, he's like raised from the sun, built of the same sun as you and I, teaching spiritual life day in and day out. I mean, young kids, how long do we sit around saying apple, banana, tow truck, right? Name the spiritual reality. That's the first thing. We are ambassadors. The second thing is we work very hard as parents to build the spiritual core in our child. But ever more as they get older, it's not a matter of peer pressure as much as peer presence. Our children are very sensitive to the environment. So it's important to help cultivate in our parent culture spiritual values. Not ask, where did your kid get into college is the first thing you say. But I am so happy to see Jim and Elizabeth. Their eyes are sparkling. I can see where your sparkle got passed right down to theirs. To really elevate our culture to be about the heart and soul of parenting, not about outcome and performance, to stop treating our kids transactionally and start loving them and treating them transformationally. We're not keeping up with the Joneses. We're walking with the Joneses in this house. Say it and do it. So you're the ambassador, spiritual communities. And the third piece is that your own story as a parent is absolutely life-changing to your children. When you talk about times where you were struggling, times where you didn't feel and know if God existed, times where you felt really cut out or put down or betrayed, and then turned to your higher power and felt a response, walked outside in nature and knew you were part of this bigger family of life. Tell your story, and that will be forever the greatest gift you give your child.
So those are some great ideas, and I think sometimes you'll have your teens get mad. I have teens right now, and they'll get mad and say, "Why aren't you mad at her? Because she did this to me," and I'll be saying something along the lines like, "Let's not stoop to that level. Let's try and turn our back away from that." The idea that I'll say forgiveness is freedom. I really try to teach that, and
forgiveness
I believe
is freedom. Beautiful.
And
spiritual mom.
And it doesn't, I always say we're not condoning bad behavior, but it's a gift you're giving yourself because you're letting something go. Kids will argue with that, and they'll say, I want someone to be on my side. I want someone to, so I'm just.
Liberation, your word is right, the gift of freedom. When we say, I don't care what someone does or doesn't do to me, I have a choice over my own moral agency, my own spiritual standards. I can't be tugged around or blown around like a paper bag in the wind. I have a spiritual anchoring. You are a wellspring of spiritual life. I guess the way I put it to my kids is that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what someone else says to you. What you have is your direct connection to who in our family we call God. Mm-hmm. And no matter who you're with or who you're not with, whether they're nice or mean, whether they're the butt of the joke or you're the queen of the homecoming, you don't work for them. You work for God.
Or if someone's uncomfortable with that word,
whatever your word,
then like what you're saying is from bridging, which I think is more radical, because of course we learn this in church or synagogue or temple or wherever you go. But if you are teaching it from a scientific base, talk about what those MRIs showed.
Right.
I mean, from a scientific perspective,
right.
You're seeing things that are going to change medicine, change health, change things as they filter down into the practicum.
So, Kara, in our house, we use the word God, but it doesn't matter what someone's word is or what their understanding of the spiritual reality is. Mm-hmm. We're all built to feel this deeper connection to life, mm-hmm. to know that we are part of one whole reality. So you live in your house and I live in mine, and we have our own unique zipped-up bio bodysuits, but we're part of one family of life. Where there's a unit of reality, a oneness, and then there's a separateness, right? And young people talk all the time about having these experiences where they suddenly realize that they and the kid in the class that they had nothing in common with actually have a connection of the heart, or they and the homeless guy have a connection of the heart. Mm-hmm. There's really something much deeper between us. That's a unit of reality, and there's a part of the brain, the parietal, that puts in and out hard boundaries and lets us know that we're actually connected. We're all one.
So when you're sitting there in the halls of Ivy League institutions and you're saying it's not an if, but a how.
Yes.
Excuse me. That it's not an... Excuse me. You're saying it's not an if, but a how behind the science of spirituality. And you're walking through these institutions where you're teaching at an Ivy League institution, and we've been so used to not talking about these things. How is it received, or how do you see it changing?
So I was able to start the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute 15 years ago at Columbia University Teachers College because the science is so very strong. The science that's peer-reviewed, that's published in medical journals, says we're all spiritual beings, and when we strengthen our spiritual life, we are more likely to recover from addiction. We are less likely to be depressed. We're far less likely to be at risk for suicide. By what magnitude? 80% less likely to become addicted, 82% less likely to take our life. There's nothing in the clinical or social sciences as profoundly life-changing, as profoundly protective against despair as a strong spiritual life. Why? Because when I don't get my way, I was fired, he broke up with me, I'm getting divorced, I don't say, why is this happening to me? I say, why is this happening for me? What is life showing me now? And that's a whole different orientation that puts us in a discussion with life.
Right. Just remembering, basically what you're saying is your scientific, peer-reviewed studies are showing that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We are all, everybody's wired for this. And that when something negative happens, we actually wouldn't want to be saying, this isn't fair, but asking a little bit from a different level of, okay, why is this happening? What can I learn from this?
How can I love more deeply? What can I let go of? You know, she was just so mean to me. I wonder if I've done that to someone. I hope I don't do that to someone. Everything's for you. It's a lesson, it's a gift, it's a course correction, it's an opportunity. Okay, that just broke my heart. Can I love so deeply that I go deeper than that? You know, maybe I don't love the same person, maybe I love someone else, but I can love differently and more deeply. Everything is for us. Everything deepens us and awakens us if we choose.
And you have some practical ways like that we can strengthen our spiritual health. It might just be going out and taking a walk when you're feeling super stressed. It might be some simple things. Talk about some of the simple things that can really make a difference.
Well, one thing I hear from people all the time is, you know, I often wonder about spirituality, but am I spiritual? That curiosity is a signal from your spiritual heart. You're already spiritual. The question is, where's your curiosity taking you? And curiosity opens doors. So if you're curious, start paying attention. The life is before you that carries guidance, that carries trail angels, people who show up and help you, that carries synchronicities, unlikely really unprobabilistic so-called coincidences. Life around you is full of information. So door number one is pay attention, because life is already helping you out. Second point, if you have a way to connect to your higher power, dust off that rusty prayer, remember how you meditated years ago, walk in nature, find your way back, because the source of life, whatever you want to call the source of life, God or the universe, is right there. And there is one source of life, and there's one porthole in every human brain. One brain ready to awaken. 7.2 billion brains ready to awaken. And it's really our choice to pay attention, to find quiet moments, to engage in prayer, reflection, meditation, and then to receive and perceive what comes.
So we're going to take a deeper dive into how this could affect maybe how we're treated medically and how it could change business, because people are starting to get degrees in this.
Yes.
For one quick moment, we're going to hear from our sponsors. We'll be right back.
Struggling with gambling? Wheeler Health's Better Choice program offers personalized support and treatment to help you regain control. Visit WheelerHealth.org to learn more and take the first step towards recovery today.
All right, we're back with Dr. Lisa Miller. We're talking about her scientific discovery, how it's providing concrete ways to access our innate spirituality, why do we want to do this? To build a life of meaning and contribution. So that's really why you wrote you're a New York Times bestselling author, but you're also working in the confines of an Ivy League institution. And that's what I find fascinating, because so much we talk about, these great halls of academia or medicine, and we don't often talk about spirituality. It's sort of okay, go over there, we have some complimentary stuff for you. But what you're showing is that, this isn't just complimentary, it's not just something you do on a Sunday. This is science, and it can really change people's lives.
So spirituality is far too often, talked about as being airy-fairy or something that's very amorphous. That is actually a very 20th century point of view, because we now have 20 years of excellent peer-reviewed science, which to your exact point, says actually, if you ignore spirituality, you are creating a hole in the center of the person. That not only is spirituality foundational to how we're built, but spirituality is essential to our deep bearings in life. Why is it that spirituality is so protective against depression? Why is it that spirituality is a path out of addiction, learning to hand it over? Because spirituality is actually a seat of awareness. It's not a belief. It's a seat of perception, to be able to see that there is guidance in life, to be able to feel that in my horrible, most painful moments, I don't fall through an abyss like a black hole, but there's a buoyancy. I'm caught. This beautiful story of one set of footprints on the stand. That's when I carried you. There is a buoyance. We are carried, we're loved, and we don't need to know our next move in life, because very often we will be guided. People will show up. It might be in your deep inner wisdom or your prayer life or your meditation life. It could be in a walk on nature. You will have guidance if you pay attention. So we're loved, held, guided, and we're never left alone, which means that we have the opportunity to show up for other people and be loving, holding, and guiding, and never leave anyone alone. And when we do, suddenly we're in a much more loving, connected world.
So in our final 5 minutes together, I just want to show the book cover again, because the book is out. It's The Awakened Brain.
Thank you.
You can pick this up. It's The New Science of Spirituality and Our Quest for an Inspired Life, written by Dr. Lisa Miller. You are a clinical psychologist. So I'm a big proponent of therapy. We've certainly interviewed a lot of psychologists on this show. Why is this not more in the practice of helping people recover from things, whether it be talk therapy or CBT, or do you see that changing?
It's changing at long last. So at the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute at Columbia Teachers College, we now have a master's degree where people can come and learn to do a foundationally spiritual approach to psychology, which is life-changing to so many people. We have parents who come. We have a lot of second career people. And not everyone becomes a therapist. Some go back into business and want to work in HR to create a more spiritually aware business and organizational life. Some people have created AI or virtual reality, where at death instead of fearing what might be on the other side. There are virtual reality simulation of transcendence. There's all sorts of ways that knowing who we are in a bigger sense changes how we live and how we can help each other.
Well, one thing that you've noticed is literally the MRIs were showing centers for spirituality
Yes.
in the brain.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that. And then does the brain look different among people who are more spiritual or so-called enlightened people?
Every one of us is born with the same circuits for awakening. We all have the potential
Okay.
for an awakened brain. And the circuits are the bonding network. We are loved and held just as we were loved and held as children in the arms of our parents or grandparents. The bonding network lets us know we are loved and held by life itself, who I might call God.
Okay.
The parietal puts in and out hard boundaries, so we know that I am unique and diverse and wonderfully who I am, and each and every one of us is part of the family of life, a larger field of life. We are loved and held. We are never alone. And we are guided. When we connect with our higher power, with in nature, with the force of life, we realize that we can stop thinking about life as a bowling alley. You know, what am I going to get? How am I going to get it? Why did he say that to me? Is the check in a clear? Stop looking down that narrow bowling alley, which is our dorsal attention network, and instead turn the floodlights on, our ventral attention network, and suddenly a new direction pops. Suddenly someone shows up and tells us exactly what we need to know. So we're loved and held, we're never alone, and we're guided. All these are forms of spiritual awareness, awakening our brain. This is here for everybody, but the more we do it,
The more we do the practices, like
Yes.
meditation or painting, or it could be different for everyone. Walking in nature.
or practice paying attention even.
Okay.
Cultivate our spiritual understanding, and revisit the very same experience from a spiritual point of view. We strengthen our awakened brain, and over time what we see are literally thicker regions in the cortex.
That's what's showing up on the MRI. You see a difference.
We see a difference. We see, just like by way of analogy, building a muscle, like a thick tree. The cortex, which is processing power, is thicker and stronger across the regions of the awakened brain. When in our study over 8 years, people prayed or meditated or looked at life through spiritual understanding. Some read scripture, some talked to friends in spirit with a spiritual understanding. This is a way of being in the world. It's not that I have to believe or not believe. It's not my faith tradition or the next person's. This is a deep way of being in the world, which can certainly be cultivated by religion. But for some people, it's cultivated other ways.
Dr. Lisa Miller, I love the book. I'm fascinated. We only have our final 30 seconds, so I do want you to shout out where people can find you, if you're interested about the intersection of spirituality and science. This is a great book, so they can follow you. And how do they find you?
Well, thank you, Kara. So I speak about the awakened brain quite extensively, and I post that on Instagram. So dr.lisamiller on Instagram.
Lisa Miller, perfect. And the awakened brain, we can get that anywhere, right?
Amazon, bnn.com, anywhere. Yeah.
Perfect. Dr. Lisa Miller, thank you so much for being here, and very, very cool information.
Kara, I love your show.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. We hope you have a great day, and be well.
CURES, sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.